Okay. Welcome everyone to our winter sowing class. I'm Annette Cormany. I'm the horticulture educator for the University of Maryland in Washington County. We are so glad that you are here and that so many people have joined us. We'll get started in just a minute, but I want to cover some housekeeping notes. Because we have such a large class, you won't be able to unmute yourself, but you will be able to ask questions. Just post them in the chat box and we'll discuss them at the end of the class. I have several co-hosts that are helping me out with this class, and they may answer some questions along the way, but Tina will be available to answer questions at the end. So again, questions go right into the chat box. We need your feedback to make our classes the absolute best they can be. So I've created two polls, one before the class and one after. So let's fire up the first one to see how everyone found out about the class and gather some demographic data so we know who we reached. So thank you for taking a minute to answer a few four short questions in a poll. So there it is. You should be able to see that and answer the poll. Thank you.
I think I made the poll disappear, Annette. I hit the wrong button.
Ah, okay. Well, let me relaunch.
And I will touch nothing.
Okay.
We didn't practice this part.
That's okay. Here we go, relaunching the poll. So try again, folks. Let us know how you found out about the class and let us know who we are reaching. Thank you. Working like a dream now. Thank you, everyone, for taking a minute. We knew that social media was being a significant blessing to this class, but other people found out through the extension website, email, friends. So thank you for taking a moment. And I'm going to end the poll, but 80% of the people who are here today found out through social media. So God bless that social media.
Annette, can I just share one thing?
Sure.
I just want to let you know that we, as a state university and outreach programs for the college, University of Maryland, there's certain demographics information that we have to capture to report to USDA and other agencies, and that's part of the questions on the polls. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I was negligent in not sharing that. So this is important. And I look at it as a way to tell us who's in the room and who we might want to try to reach a little bit harder, see if we have any gaps so we can teach, make everything available to the most people we can. So, all right, thank you very much for that. Now let's get started on winter sowing. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Tina Webster, a Washington County Master Gardener since 2008, who has a very, very green thumb. Tina's been winter sowing for more than a few years, and she is going to share her absolute best tips for success. So hit it, Tina.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Let me get my screen shared here so you can see the presentation. All right. As Annette said, my name is Tina Webster and I'm a Washington County Master Gardener. Welcome to my Western Maryland living room. Hopefully we'll not be meeting members of my family like the dog. So let's get started on winter sowing. By the end of this presentation, hopefully you'll be able to understand what the process of winter sowing is. You'll get to create a little mini greenhouse from a recycled container. And you can start growing plants from seed with little cost, no grow lights, and little care afterwards. So what is winter sowing? If you look on the back decks of some of the people in this class, I suspect you're going to see snow-covered plastic jugs. So it's a really cost-effective way for growing a lot of plants. And this is the thing that really drew me to the first seminar I went to on winter sowing. I love flowers. I love having annuals all over my deck, all over my garden, all in my vegetable garden, but it's very expensive to buy all those plants. So this is an extremely cost-effective way to get a lot of plants without a lot of cost. It's also a good technique for trying to control the germination, both in terms of location and the conditions, and we'll talk a little more about that. And it's a method to start seedlings that can be left unattended for weeks at a time. And it's also just a really good way for gardeners to battle cabin fever in these winter months. And I'll add to this, it's really great to do with kids. So how do you do it? Basically, you use a plastic container to create a little tiny mini greenhouse that protects the plants from cold temperatures, but also creates the ideal place for seedlings to grow. And you're doing all of this outside, which is great. It works best for seeds that are cold tolerant, especially ones that require a period of cold to grow, which some of our seeds do. So why does it work? Well, seeds get exposed to the cold that some of them need to germinate. It's called stratification. And we try and replicate this a lot of times with seeds by putting them in our refrigerator and taking them out and getting the timing just right, which I have done wrong on more than one occasion. And then you don't get any seeds. This process really sort of eliminates the doubt in the process and then takes care of it itself. It also works as the seeds freeze and thaw. It breaks through those seed coats. It's called scarification. So if it has a really tough seed coat that needs to be broken through, sometimes manually you have to do this with a razor blade or with soaking the seeds, and it can be hard, but this process takes care of that for you. And then, bad news for us gardeners, seeds germinate when temperature and daylight are optimal. I know we think we're very, very important to seeds and plants growing, but the seeds know what they're doing. And this process just lets them do it. What are the advantages to winter sowing? Seeds are grown without taking up space in your house. I remember the first year I grew seeds under grow lights, my husband was like, "Oh, that's so cute. There's a little flat of plants here." And then as I potted and repotted and repotted, the basement was gone and taken over with plants. And I know I'm not the only person with this story. So this is a great way to grow plants outside of your house. So it's not taking up a lot of space, but you can grow a lot of plants. It doesn't require grow lights, which have gotten a lot easier to use. But I know the first few years when I grew things in grow lights, the joke around the neighborhood was, what is she growing in her basement? So this eliminates all of that. It provides a protective environment versus direct sowing. As we can see, our little friend, Mr. Squirrely there, likes to go dig up in your garden. So you can put seeds down in your garden, but that doesn't guarantee that they're going to stay there. So this is a way to kind of protect those seeds. You can leave these unattended for weeks. That's one thing with growing under grow lights that you cannot do. You have to tend to your plants. A lot of people like to go away during the winter, especially if you're someplace cold. You like to get away to someplace warm, and you don't have to worry about your plants because you put these outside and you don't worry about them. It also controls the location of germinations so you don't mistake things for weeds, because no matter how good a gardener you are, sometimes you look at something and go, yeah, I don't think that belongs there. And then you pluck it up. And then before long, you're going, I wonder where that blazing star is that I planted. So it eliminates that as well. It eliminates the problem of damping off disease. It's a fungal disease that happens when you're growing seedlings. And usually you've put weeks, maybe even months into your plants, and then all of a sudden you go to look at them and they're just dead. And there's really not much recovering from that. This process eliminates that. It eliminates those moisture concerns. There is no need to harden off your transplants, which is another very time-consuming thing. And if things go wrong, like say you're carrying all your transplants in for the day and you trip and the whole seed tray goes over and you lose all of your plants that you've been working on for months, it's very frustrating. This eliminates the need to do any of that. And as I said earlier, the stratification and scarification are done by nature. If you've ever tried to use fingernail clippers or a razor or something else to break a seed coat, you know how frustrating that process can be. So now that we've talked about all the advantages and how wonderful it is, how do you actually do it? The first thing you do is you choose the right seeds. And the way you choose the right seeds is you look at your seed packet. It's full of information. You look for words like self-seeding or hardy annual or needs pre-chilling, can be sown in the fall, can be directly sown early. Seedlings can withstand frost. Other keywords you want to look for: wildflower, prairie flower, or weed, milkweed, butterweed. These are some of the indications that these seeds will do particularly well with winter sowing. Now, I'm going to put a caveat on that. These are the 6 seeds you'll use that you can almost definitely have success with. But last year, after the pandemic and having difficulty finding actual vegetable transplants, I decided to go ahead and try and winter sow tomatoes and pepper plants last year, and it worked. So at this point, I've been winter sowing for over a decade. I would say there's almost nothing except for tropical plants that I would not try to winter sow, because it's just seeds and soil and a plastic container. Okay, so first, then you have to collect your containers. So what kind of containers you want? You want something clear. It can be green plastic, but you want something clear. Water jugs and milk jugs work particularly well. Also, I like plastic salad green containers that you get from the grocery store for smaller plants, for plants that don't grow as tall, because there's a lot of space in there and you can grow a lot of plants at once. Juice bottles also work. And I know some people had questions about, well, what if I don't drink water, things like that? What if I don't have these containers? Well, you can check with friends and neighbors. Most people don't mind giving you their recycling as opposed to putting it in their recycling bin. So you can check with them to see if they have things they'd be willing to give you. Or if you are like my sister, who started this and became, she loves flowers, she loves saving money, so she became a super winter sower. She stocks the folks at Starbucks for their containers, and they're usually more than happy to give you their excess containers too. So there are sources. So first you need to clean the containers, and this, all you really need is hot soapy water. So you just take off the lids and you fill them up with water, rinse them well and drain them. You don't need to use bleach for this. You just need to get them clean. One thing I will say is with milk containers, it takes a little more effort because there's usually some residual smell in there, but hot water will usually do the trick. Okay, and then you just get about preparing your little mini greenhouse. For bottles and jugs, you just cut them a slit halfway up the container, and we'll have a little hands-on demonstration after this so you can see what that looks like. And from that little slit that you cut halfway up, you just cut around horizontally, but you want to leave a hinge. You can see on that bottom picture, there's a hinge there. Because if you don't, it's very, very hard to get the container back together. If you cut the lid completely off, it's okay, you can make it work. It's just a little more difficult, but I've done this with school children and they're very enthusiastic cutters. So sometimes the lid gets cut off and you just tape it back on. Really important, you need to poke drainage holes in the bottom of the container. Otherwise the container will fill up with water and that's not really good for your seedlings. So you want to make sure there is drainage in your container. So you just poke some holes in the bottom of it. For things like a salad container that have a lid, I have just cut little holes in the top of the container so that the rain can get in, because you do want rain and moisture to be able to get into the system. But you just make sure you poke holes at the bottom so that it can come back out. And the system sort of regulates itself in terms of having enough water. And people have gotten really creative with this. For people who weren't on the call earlier, there's a winter sowing group on Facebook. I checked there's some on Instagram and Twitter as well. And you'll see people using all kinds of containers to do this winter sowing. As long as it's clear and it holds soil and you can get some drainage out of it, you can usually use it. Very important, label the container. It seems obvious, but if you don't label your container and you go out when the things start to bloom and you see green, you're like, oh, I'll be able to identify it. Well, I hope you can, but you're better off just labeling it. You can use a Sharpie to write on the container on the outside. You can put a piece of duct tape stuck to the container. I personally prefer labeling the inside of the containers because even with Sharpie, if this is sitting out in the elements for months, all of that stuff can wear off. So I prefer to label it on the inside. The outside can be helpful just so you know what you have when you look at the jug and you're not trying to peek in the hole and see what your popsicle stick or vertical blind says. And we do, Master Gardeners, we love our vertical blinds. If people are getting rid of them, they just bring them to us and we cut them up and use them for all kinds of plant labels. They're very useful. And again, recycling something. I've seen people create grids where they have numbers and they'll number each of their jugs and then they'll keep a master list of what those jugs are. So that's another way you can label your containers. Really important, you have to add soil to the container, but make sure it's potting mix. It needs to be light and fluffy so the seeds can push up and down in the soil. And so that once the roots start growing, they can grow really freely into the container. So it's free from contamination. Fertilizer is not required. Sometimes it's difficult to find potting mix that doesn't have fertilizer. So having fertilizer will not hurt anything, but you don't need to look for something that has fertilizer in it. Absolutely don't use garden soil. It's much too heavy for the seeds to be able to germinate in. So that's not a good option. And you want to pre-moisten the soil. You don't want to get it super soggy, but you want to get it wet enough that the seeds can kind of stick to it. And you want to put about 3 or 4 inches of soil into your container. Then you sow your seeds into the container. You can sprinkle the seeds onto the soil and sort of tamp them down to get good seed to soil contact. I always say it's like if you're petting a good dog, you kind of pat it down like you're doing that. And most seeds do not require covering unless it's a very large seed. In which case, if it's an inch or more, I would say put a little bit of soil over top of it, just barely cover it and tap it down. Because as the plants freeze and thaw, as the containers are outside, they'll cover themselves naturally. So it's not something you need to worry a whole lot about. And then you water and seal the container. I know your soil's pre-moistened, but I always like to put just a little bit of water on the soil before I seal up the container. And then you make sure your label's in there. And then you seal up your container because there's nothing like sealing up your container and having the label in your hand. Very frustrating. So make sure you put the label in there before you seal it up. And now it's time, depending on where you are, maybe not Argentina, but certainly in Western Maryland, to throw on your coat and go outside and look for a good place to put your winter sowing, because that's where it's going to live all winter. Some people start this, I think the traditional idea is to start it on the winter solstice back in December. I am never that organized and usually way too busy in December to do that. So you can start at any time. I've started it up as late as March. As long as you're not dealing with a native seed, it's okay. When you go outside, you're looking for a sunny location, but you want it to be, some people put them over under their house, right up against their houses, but you have to be careful that there's not an overhang, because if there's an overhang, it won't get any rain. And it doesn't require a lot of rain, but you do want to have some rain. So make sure you're not putting it underneath something that's going to keep it from getting rain. You also want to protect it from the wind and animals. I know around here lately, we've been having crazy wind. I tend to group mine together. I have raised beds in my garden, and that's where I tend to put my winter sowing. Right here is an example of the year I put it out by my deck, which also worked well. It's got a little windbreak, so it's protected, and I cluster them together so that they are a little more protected from the wind. If you are worried about it, you can kind of I've put bricks around them to try and make sure that they can stay secure. And you just have to be careful that they're not in the pathway of animals who will just knock them over. Okay, and then you wait for the green. Again, when I took this class 10 years ago with a friend, the instructor said, oh, you're going to go outside and you're going to start looking in the tops of your jugs to see if there's green. And I was like, I am not going to do that. I'm a very patient person. I will not be doing that. Well, darn if you know it, I was out there just as soon as I thought there might be green, peeking in there and happy as a school child when I did find some green stuff growing in my containers. So that's part of the fun. It's a lot of fun with kids to do this because they love going out and finding green things. And the nice thing about this technique with children is that it's not an exact technique. It doesn't have to be controlled the way you do with grow lights. So you can have a lot of fun and a lot of success. And if they throw a whole packet of seeds into the container, that's okay. You just get more plants. If they don't cut the container quite right, that's okay too. So it's really good thing to do with kids. I've done it with school children. I've done it with grown people. Both people seem to enjoy it. Okay. So eventually you're going to open up your containers. Once you start seeing green, once the weather starts warming up, those days in April and May that we're all dreaming about right now, when the weather is warm and you're thinking about your garden, you want to open your container up a little bit. And that could be just peeling back the tape a little bit so a little sun and a little elements can get into the container. When the first true leaves appear, and for true leaves are not the first leaves that emerge from a plant, they're usually the second set that actually look like the leaves of the plant you're trying to grow. So those would be the true leaves, not the first seed leaves that you see appear, but the first true leaves. You want to open up your container a little bit more to let it get a little more acclimated to the environment. And again, your plants, assuming there's no horrible frost or anything like that happening, your plants are going to be okay because the seeds have decided when they're going to germinate based on the temperature and the sunlight that's available to them. So they've made that decision yourself. You have not forced that as a gardener. So they have a little more protection because of that. Eventually, you're going to remove the tape completely from the seal of the container and let your plants harden off. And this is when they can naturally, the wind is good for them to help them balance. They get a little more acclimated. And so by the time you put them in your garden, they're really ready to be there.
Tina,
Yes.
I apologize. Stop sharing for a second.
Sure.
Or actually, if you don't mind, let me, Annette, stop the recording for one quick second or pause the recording, don't end the recording. Some people have accidentally, I think, did a little annotation. So in the.
Okay, we are now recording again.
All right, I'm gonna share. It looks cleared off.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So now your plants are kind of hardened off and ready to go into your garden. So now it's time to transplant. So how do you do that? You look at your seed packet again. Master gardeners love seed packets. They tell you all kinds of great things about your plants, like how long it's going to take them to germinate and when you can put them in your garden. So you look on the back of your seed packet and you transplant your seedlings into them. And a lot of times you'll get more than one plant out of a winter sowing container. So you just sort of gently use your fingers to break apart the plants that are growing together. If you have things that are really tightly interwoven, you could take a pair of scissors and sort of trim them off. You're allowed to pick a favorite. These aren't your children. So if one's growing better than the other, you just kind of snip the other one and let him be food for the plant that's growing well. And then you put that into the garden. Okay, some things to consider when you're putting your plants out. Critters. This adorable little puppy chewing on a winter sowing. That is not my puppy, but I have a similar story about puppies and winter sowing. I was gone. My husband's like, there was a racket in the backyard. I don't know what it was. Looked out and our new puppy was having a grand time tossing all of my winter sowing up over her shoulder and crushing it down. So winter sowing didn't work well that year. So if you have a mischievous pet or you know you have some wild creatures that like to mess with things, you may want to move things to a more protected location. If this person has their winter sowing up on their deck, on their table, in containers to keep it from blowing away. One thing I will say about if you have your containers in flats like this, you need to make sure there's drainage there too, because you don't want to flood your plants. Temperature changes, you kind of want to keep that in consideration. If there's really big temperature changes during the winter, you may want to check your winter sowing more often. Honestly, I usually put mine outside, and really, unless it's a nice day and I'm just strolling in my yard, I don't check it again. But if there's really big temperature changes, you might want to check it and make sure it's doing okay. Typically, you do not have to water these winter sowing. The frost, when it freezes and thaws, it creates condensation inside of the bottles, and that will be enough to water the plants and keep this, because you're just trying to keep the seeds moist at this point. You're not trying to grow a whole plant. So that's usually enough. But if you have a really unusual dry spell, or if you're in a really warm spot, you might want to consider watering them. I've had to do this maybe once or twice in a decade, so it's not very common. But those are just some things to consider. I'm going to do a little bit of talking about native plants. Native plants are near and dear to the hearts of a lot of gardeners, and winter sowing works particularly well for it. It works particularly well because native plants are plants that have been in the same ecosystem location for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. So these plants are adapted to the environment, and that's part of the reason winter sowing works really well for them. Because a lot of times when we're trying to propagate native plants, they need periods of cold, and they need periods of getting their seed coats taken off. So I think because of that, it works really, really well. And natives just support a lot of things. They support our pollinators, our wildlife. They create healthy ecosystems, which is what we're looking for. And native plants, they sort of evolve naturally with our native pollinators. So they support each other, and they provide food and shelter. And that's why you'll hear us talking a lot about growing native plants and how important they are. They're really crucial for the pollinators and beneficial insects, and that's really kind of where it all starts. If you don't have these beneficial insects and the pollinators, then you'll never end up with healthy fruits and vegetables. The ecosystem depends on all these things, and native plants can be the anchor for that. And native plants are just beautiful. They're really beautiful, and they support our healthy ecosystem. These pictures are taken from our demo garden at the Ag Center in Washington County. It's a teaching garden that we use to show people the different techniques you can use. I've taught this winter sowing class from this garden, and you can look, all these plants are native. On the top, there's beautiful purple coneflower, there's green coneflower, there's bee balm, there's phlox, there's all manner of beautiful plants. And then down on the bottom, there's some red chokeberry, the white behind it, and the yellow underneath of it is golden ragwort. So you can definitely grow lots of beautiful native plants. Native plants, one thing about them is they do tend to grow slowly, and they may not bloom the first year. So you just have to be a little patient. And if that happens, you can put them in pots for the summer and plant them in the fall, because fall is an excellent time to plant, especially native plants. So at this point, we're going to switch it up to a hands-on demonstration, so you can sort of get an idea of how we actually do this. So I think, Annette, we're going to stop sharing. Is that what we decided with this? And
Annette, you're muted.
Yeah, Annette, you're muted again.
Sorry, yes, we will stop sharing, do your demo, and then we'll come back for the rest of the presentation.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to move the computer a little bit so it's easier to see what I'm doing.
Annette, can you turn off your video while she's demonstrating? Thank you.
Okay. All right, so what do you need? You need a plastic container. Handy dandy little plastic container. And from that, you're going to take, I use just inexpensive serrated knife to poke holes in the bottom. If you're doing this with kids, like I've done this with kindergartners to high schoolers. Older kids, I let them do it themselves. Younger kids, I do all the pre-cutting ahead of time because nothing ends a fun activity like somebody getting injured. So just want to take your knife and poke some holes in the bottom of here. And once you've poked enough holes, the magic of the internet, you'll see I have 5 or 6 holes in here, and that's plenty for drainage. That's enough that you can do drainage. So you just want to have holes about like that. Your seeds won't come out. Don't worry about that. And then once you do that, you want to flip it over on its side and take your same knife and just poke a hole into the container. Some people use different things. Some people use, like my sister, when she was doing tons and tons of poking holes in the bottom, she used a drill. People have used hot glue guns. So there are definitely different ways to do it that are safer than a knife if you want to take that option. And once you have this slit in here, then you want to just start cutting, and you're going to cut all the way along until you get almost to the other side of the hinge. And you'll end up with something that looks like this. So you can see there's a little hinge, so you can still attach it, but you have plenty of room to open it up and put your soil in. So you want to open it up, and then you're going to take your potting mix. And how do I know it's potting mix? Because I can pick it up with one hand with no trouble. And you want to start putting that pre-moistened mix into your container. And that will end up looking like this. So if you can see the side of it, you can see there's about 3 or 4 inches of soil in here. So you want to put that in there. And then you want to pick up your seed packet. Black-eyed Susans, Maryland state flower. In Maryland, we love our state flag and we love our state flowers. So great native plants. So we want to take our seeds. The first thing we want to do is take our vertical blind and write down the name of the seeds. So you want to write Black-eyed Susan, magically there. And then I just stick it in the back corner of my container and put it right there. Then you want to take your seeds. This is another point of caution. When I want to show you what I use to write on my, I didn't explain this earlier. This is a wax crayon. Some people call it a laundry marker. You can buy them at any Home Depot, at any office store, like Office Depot. And it's one of those things with a little string that you pull out and it keeps unraveling, but it tends to last the whole winter. By the time winter is over, that writing will still be visible. With Sharpie, that's not necessarily true. So you use your marker and get that. You get your seeds. You can either dump them out into your hand, or you can, if you're a kindergartner, you just dump the whole packet in and you put them down there. And then you want to tap really gently. And then you want to close up your container. Maybe put a little water in here, close up your container, and then you get your duct tape. Now, I like fun colored duct tape, especially if I'm working with kids. It just adds a little more element it adds just another element to the fun of it. And then you take this, you take your duct tape and you start at one end. Pick this up so you can see it. So you just start where your gap is right here, and you go all the way around, and you end up with this. Your container is all sealed up. It's got its label in there. So you have this cap. What are we gonna do with it? We're just gonna get rid of it. We don't need that anymore. So just get rid of that. And then you're gonna take this outside and you're gonna find a nice place for it to live for the winter. So that is really it. A little accelerated, the magic of the internet, but that's really how you winter sow. So let me get back to presentation. We have a couple more slides and then we'll take some questions. I see there's some questions that popped up in the chat box. So let's do this. Okay. All right. If you're interested in becoming a master gardener, there's the people who put this presentation on, the lovely people from the Demo Garden sponsored this. If you're in Washington County and you're interested in it, I would encourage it. It's a wonderful group of people, great way to grow your gardening knowledge, help the environment, make new friends, give a lot back to the community. We do a lot of community work, a lot of education work. And with this particular group, you will eat a lot of amazing food. That's just a given. If you're not in Washington County, I'd encourage you to look at your extension office. I'm willing to bet there is a Master Gardener program there as well. And if you have any gardening questions in general, my lovely co-host, Annette Cormany, is available to answer all kinds of questions. The weirder, the better. She loves them. This is her phone number and her email contact. And the Home and Garden Information Center is a website, the extension, the University of Maryland, who sponsors this program, runs. There's a wealth of information about all kinds of gardening, fruits, vegetables, lawns, you name it. There's probably information out there, a video out there, and certainly somebody who can help you find information. So with that, I guess I will stop sharing and we will see if there's questions.
Yes, Tina, stop share. And we'll thank you for doing an amazing job of teaching. So we are going to take some questions, but I also am going to, while we're doing that, I'm going to roll the poll. We have some questions, a second set on our class, so that we can. Hang on. Right back at you. Accessing.
I wrote some questions down from the chat while she was talking.
Great.
Okay.
You want me to ask those?
Yes, Dusty. Thank you.
Okay, sure. And Tina, when to sow tomatoes and peppers? Is January and February okay?
January and February are fine. I honestly started mine in March, and I think I should have done it earlier for the peppers. The tomatoes didn't seem to have, generally tomatoes grow easier for me than peppers do, but I think the peppers could have used a little bit longer, but there's nothing wrong with starting them now.
Okay, and somebody asked about, can you use a seed starting, should you use a seed starting mix as opposed to potting soil?
You can, but you don't have to. I find seed starting mix, sometimes it's harder to get wet and keep wet, but if that's, I've used both and had luck with both.
Okay, what about snow? But that provides the water that you need to water so it's okay to leave them out in the snow. And you had pictures of snow too.
Yeah, so I guess a couple years ago, we had 3 feet of snow in one storm here in Maryland. My winter sowing sat out through all of it and did just fine.
Okay. How about chicken wire on the tops to keep the critters from getting in?
That's not a bad idea. If you know you have critters that are a problem, chicken wire would be fine because it still wouldn't interfere with the water or the sun.
Okay. What about cucumbers? Can you?
I've never tried cucumbers, but I would certainly give it a shot.
Okay. Do you leave the moisture condensation from the sealing of the tape? I'm not quite sure I understood that question, but that's what it said.
Well, so condensation is a part of the system. I'm not sure if I did a good job explaining that, but you want condensation in the system. You want it to be freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing. That's part of what makes the growing happen. So if that's the question, then yes, it's fine.
And you said natives work well with this.
Very well. Natives tend to do well here when other germination techniques are hard.
And examples of vegetable seeds that work.
I've done, like I said, I've done tomatoes, I've done peppers. I don't know that there's one I would not try.
Okay, great. Somebody's having a yard or a plant sale like we do. Theirs is in mid-May. So they're looking for plants that would bloom by mid-May, if you have any ideas of that.
Well,
Pretty
I would
much
look for,
anything, I'd say.
yeah, I would think pretty much anything. You want to look for things, look at the back of your seed packet, look at what germinates quickly. Look at what might be germinating early, because those are things. We do our plant sale in April, so sometimes it can be a little tough to get stuff, but by May, I would think just about anything would be there.
Oh, good. Okay. How many seeds do you usually put in a milk jug?
It depends on how big the plant is. When I'm doing like something tiny, like small snapdragons, I'll put 5 or 6 in there. When I did tomatoes and peppers, I was a lot more careful. I only put 4 or 5 seeds in there. So it depends on how big the plant will eventually get.
Okay. Somebody asked about long tap roots. Do you do that when somebody else and another person replied and said, yeah, you just have to take them out or take them out earlier. So I forget what the answer was, but have you done anything with long tap roots?
I did dill and it did fine. Dill tends to not like to move. But as long as you get it out in time, and that's the thing about the containers, you keep them completely intact. You don't mess with that taproot. You put the taproot into the ground. And I think maybe that's the reason why it's not as much of an issue.
Okay, great. Another person asked about an unheated greenhouse. But the problem with that is you'd have to be watering it all the time, which kind of, well, you answer that one.
No, I think you did. You just answered it. You would. There's no reason you couldn't use it, but you are creating a little more work for yourself than just putting it outside. And I know it's a little trepidatious to put your baby plants outside and think they're going to be okay, but they really will be okay.
Another person asked about plugs. What are plugs and have you ever used them?
I've never winter sowed with plugs. I assume they're talking about the plugs you get from bare root plugs and things that you can get from nurseries. I've never used them.
Okay. Someone said don't use potting soil with water retention beads.
I would say that's probably somebody's voice of experience, and I would listen to that.
And I think that's all the questions I got that I got from the beginning before you stopped. Maybe Annette has more.
I do have a few more. I'm ending the poll. Thank you again to everyone who participated. Really appreciate that. Okay, some specific questions you already addressed. As far as size of the container, some people said they use things as small as water bottles. What have you found works out best? And is there a magic ratio of number of seeds per container?
Well, I would say imagine what your plant is going to look like as a transplant, if you can envision that, and don't put more than that number of seeds into your container. I really do like milk jugs the best because they give some height. That's what's worked best for me is using milk jugs. And then if I know the plant is going to be small, I'll use the spinach containers and the salad containers. And again, if I know it's going to be a small plant, I'll put 8 or 10 seeds in there. If I know it's going to be a little bit bigger plant, I'll put less seeds in.
Okay, someone asked if it's okay to mix potting soil and garden soil in your mix.
I would not do it. I've never tried it, but I would not do it.
And let's see, we talked about colors of bottle, but someone mentioned that some of the bottles they have are blue. Any difference? You talked about clear or green.
I think if you can see through it and it's blue, it's probably fine.
Okay. And we got a lot of questions about snow, which you may have already addressed with Dusty's list of questions. People in areas that get lots of snow, but I know you had pictures that showed jugs really covered with lots of snow.
Yeah, I mean, I would think now, I can't speak for Canada or Minnesota, if you're getting 5-6 feet of snow, you might want to put them in a little more protected place. But like I said, I had a storm where we had 3 feet of snow, and once it finally thawed out, the snow actually sort of insulates the jugs, so it can help them too. If it's really, really cold, but there's a lot of snow, it'll protect them. But 3 feet of snow didn't do any damage to my winter sowing. And I'm gonna I cannot remember exactly where the woman who started this was from, but it was someplace very cold and very snowy. I mean, thinking upstate New York or Minnesota. So clearly the technique works.
Okay. Several people have asked to spend a little more time on defining how to best moisten the soil and what level of moisture is right.
I usually put it in, I put my soil into, I have like a little tote got from gardener supply or something. It's a little tote I put the soil in there and then I add water and I just kind of feel around until it feels kind of like a wrung out sponge is the best way I can describe what the soil should feel like. But it is forgiving. If you get a little too wet, the water will drain out. The water the system doesn't need will drain out. If you get it a little too dry and you put it outside, chances are Mother Nature will fix that for you too. So it's not like when you're putting plants under lights where you have to be very, very careful about what the moisture content is in your soil.
Any specific guidelines on what temperature is right for the jugs to first be uncovered?
I don't know that I have an exact temperature. I would guess it's somewhere in the 50, 60 range. It's usually when I can walk outside at night with like a sweater on and still feel comfortable. That's when I know that's a really exact temperature range. And my engineer father would be thrilled with that answer. But it's just when it's starting, when spring is starting to break and you're starting to, get a little more warmth in the nights.
Okay. We had people ask specific questions about, I know you said this is good for most everything that you've tried, but we had people ask, is this okay for herbs, perennial herbs? Is it okay for annuals, biennials? Can you think of any limitations on that?
I really can't. I don't know about biennials. I've never done those, but I've done perennials, I've done annuals, I've done vegetables. I haven't had issues with any of them. Biennials, I would say that they would work fine because perennials and annuals both work, but I do not have any personal experience with it. I think the only thing I would stay away from is tropical plants. But honestly, if I had a lot of seeds and some time, I'd probably give that a shot too, but not count on it working.
And people asked about pairing this with other growing techniques. In other words, can you do this inside a high tunnel? Could you do this inside a cold frame?
Again, you could do it with those things. I would think a cold frame, you might have issues with heat, keeping your winter sowing too warm. High tunnels, a little less than that, but with both of those, you're going to have to water, which is one of the advantages of not doing this, but you're going to have to check the moisture content of the jugs if you keep them inside something that doesn't allow rain.
Okay. And we did have someone in the chat say, yes, biennials work. So actually 2 people said that. So
okay, great.
Feedback from the group. Thank you for everybody for sharing your experience.
I think in the presentation, or there's a sheet that there's lots of winter sowing groups out there who are more than happy to give you information and help you with your questions. So I would seek those out.
Right. And again, we've had a lot of questions about whether the session will be posted. Again, I have been recording the session and we will post it on our YouTube cluster channel. I'll be sending you a link to that channel. Ashley and a few others have been kind enough to post that link. So again, in about a week, it'll be up there. And again, our state office also has a winter sowing class. I'll send everyone information on that. And just in case you'd like to keep learning, it sounds like you guys have had some great questions. And I really appreciate everybody in the room sharing their answers, sharing their experience. Do any of the other co-hosts have any questions that they noted that we need to address?
Yes, this is Dusty again. Somebody asked about what zone are we in, and they were in zone 5. I'm assuming since it's Canada all the way down to Argentina, you can do this pretty much in any place in the U.S. that has winter and summer and spring and fall.
I would think so, yes.
And beyond, since we have folks from Canada joining us.
Right. Well, that's yeah, all the way to Canada down. How about poppies? Have you ever tried poppies?
I have not, but I would love to.
Somebody forgot their fall bulbs in the garage and forgot to put them in. Oops. And want to know if you ever tried putting bulbs in yours to see if they'll come up in the spring.
I have not. I've not put them in the jugs to do that. I have been known to stick bulbs in the ground in January and February in my potted plants and have had pretty good success.
that might be better because you can get further down in the ground than you can in the potted, in the milk jug,
Yes, I would think it's not quite enough insulation.
right?
I will tell you that the late great garden writer Henry Mitchell, who wrote a wonderful column for the Washington Post for years, confesses in his book, The Essential Earthman, to sneaking at bulbs in January. So gosh, if Henry can do it.
Actually, I've done the same thing. Late for it. And so you would say like maybe March would probably be the last month that you should do this to give the plants time to germinate and grow. Someone
I
asked,
would, that's as late as I have done it.
Okay.
And like I said, that was with tomatoes and peppers, and I don't think I'd push it much further than that.
someone asked about late frost or freezes, and that would be kind of in that time zone. Okay, that's it.
Tina or anyone in the group, does anybody have any experience with root vegetables? Starting them?
I have never done root vegetables.
Okay. I would think that would be a little tricky. You'd have to make sure you get them early. And someone also asked about things that are typically difficult to transplant. Is that a challenge with winter sowing? I'm thinking something like a morning glory that just hates being fussed with, or sometimes sunflowers as well.
I have winter sowed sunflowers with no trouble. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to transplant them. So I just stuck them in
Don't
a
tell
jug
your
and
sunflowers, yeah.
they grew just fine. So
Okay. Any of the other co-hosts note any other questions that we haven't addressed?
No, I think just, recommending that if you're unsure, just start out slow and give it a try and see how it works in your area.
Right, right.
great advice.
And again, I will be sending out the link to the recording I mentioned, but I'll also send a PDF of Tina's talk slides. So you'll have all that, as well as a handout that Tina prepared. That's a quick and easy one-page, actually two-page handout, Winter Sowing at a Glance. So thank you everyone who's participated. Thank you for teaching. Thank you to all my co-hosts. Happy sowing and growing.
Absolutely.
One other question, Annette, before you go.
Yes.
Somebody asked about how can they get on the list for other classes that we may be teaching?
Yes, I did note that, and I will include that in my email to everyone. We have a horticulture mailing list that we use to share information on all Master Gardener classes and events, and I'll be including information in that in the email to everyone. All right, thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
So as a reminder you can stop the recording when you're ready.